Well, welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Let me start just by saying that when I was requested to put together my thoughts on the elections for the next decade, I thought that a good way to go about it, and I am going to basically concur with Peter's assessment at the beginning, is that if I were to look back 10 years and see what has happened, I couldn't really claim that there has been like a staggering speed in technology adoption. Some of the technologies that were available or that were somewhat starting to become available at the time are still the ones that we use. However, I do see some encouraging signs moving forward. And again, things like the pandemic have actually acted as accelerators of innovation in technology across a number of sectors, and the public sector in particular has been no exception. So through that, I do think that we are allowed to be a bit more ambitious in how we imagine elections in the years to come. And let me just start by saying that I do think that, my overarching prediction here is that there is indeed going to be an increased technology adoption across all election administration activities. Of course, this is not an epiphany. This is not something that I'm actually betting against the odds here. I think it's very easy to see this becoming a reality moving forward. But I want to elaborate a bit more on that, saying that I think that innovation is going to happen mostly across sort of three different themes. The first one is increased accuracy. The second one, increased transparency. And the third one, increased accessibility, or put it in another way, a streamlined voter experience for all. And let me delve into each one of those three innovation themes. When we talk about increased accuracy, and let me also mention here that some of the things that I see happening in the future are in many cases continuous evolutions of things that are already happening and that are already starting to happen right now. One example is the one that I mentioned here, which is electronic voter verification and authentication. So this is already happening in many countries. I basically say that this is going to become more widely adopted. And I do see that biometrics are going to play an increased role in this verification process as biometrics become more accurate and even become less intrusive to an extent for the process of authentication. They will become more widely used and they will improve the voter's experience and the interaction with both the EMB, the electoral management body, and the actual poll workers on election day. I do think that privacy demands will also kick in and will likely open an opportunity to give voters a bit more control on how the biometric authentication process happens. We already see some applications available that address this type of requirements in terms of giving the citizens control of the biometric information that they have and how it is used. So even though governments are going to still be the brokers, let's say, of the national identity or the voter identity in the case of election management bodies in some cases, I do see a potential increase of or somewhat shift of portions of that control back to the voter happening, in the next few years. And again, allowing me to dream a bit, I do think that innovation in this area will eventually lead us to a vote anywhere capability, which is essentially allowing voters to cast their ballots on any polling station during election day, not the specific one that they registered to, but rather any polling station that happens to be closer to them on election day. Increased and improvements in connectivity and as well in biometrics and authentication will allow us to essentially provide these capabilities and this added convenience to the voters without a lot of effort, I would say. And again, this is something that we already start to see in different countries, and there are actually some jurisdictions in the US who have successfully tried out this capability, and we're going to talk about that in a minute or two. Moving on, another area in which I see a trend in terms of technology innovation is in the capture and consolidation of election results. Again, this is an area that many countries are already doing some work in terms of providing some sort of technology to automate the process by which results are consolidated, are captured at the polling stations and then sent over to election headquarters for tabulation, to final consolidation. I do see that, right now there are jurisdictions in which this happens not directly at the polling station, but rather through a layered approach. The results actually have to travel physically from sometimes a municipality or a constituency, and then they have to be potentially loaded into the information system that feeds into the central server. I do see an increasing trend towards bringing the technology closer to the polling station, and actually through that increasing the accountability and the empowerment to the poll workers, because they are the ones at the end of the day who are mandated by law and who are responsible to count the votes and craft the results report. So it's only natural they are the ones who are given the possibility of capturing that information on a digital device and signing it off and send it securely to election headquarters. This provides a lot of benefits. It streamlines the process. It creates, it allows us to address, to one extent, the possibility of the results as they become public and the results as they are coming in, and if they are being made available to the general public, it allows us to mitigate the effect of potential geographical mirages. I mean, seeing the results that do not represent the universe of the voters and then might lean towards one area or the other. Using this technology, we will be providing some capabilities to mitigate that risk. And I would say in this day and age where instant access to information is becoming ever more demanding, having these types of technology enables election management bodies with the ability to fill in the information gap that typically exists between the time where polls are closed and results are started to become public. So this gap right now, when it's not plugged, it's essentially filled by whatever rumor or conspiracy theory becomes more controversial during the election day. So being able to step ahead of that by publishing timely and accurate results is a very useful weapon against fake news and misinformation campaigns during those critical hours of election night. And right now that, we have systems or we have devices that are both deployed for verification and potential devices that are used to capture and securely transmit election results, why not just go ahead and make that a single, let's say, digital device that provides assistance for poll workers on election day for the whole set of activities that they have to undertake. We call that concept the automated polling station, and it essentially illustrates the convergence of all of these technologies, spanning from verification and tabulation into all of the activities that poll workers need to do on election day, because we know that they need the help. So having this a device that assists them as they set up the polling station, as they register the fellow poll workers or even election observers, and as they conduct the day, the activities through the day, addressing incidents, reporting, let's say, estimated or reporting scheduled events. For example, one thing that we have been able to do has been to transmit turnout checkpoints throughout the day. And this allows, for guaranteeing the operational continuity of the election at the polling station. And it also allows the election authorities to have a clear and accurate view on how the election is taking place throughout the election day. So I think that we see that these trends will converge towards this automated polling station concept that essentially mixes or bundles all of this into an overarching assisting device for poll workers and election officials on the field during election day. However, all of these technologies still leave out an important element of the election day, which is counting. In many of these instances, counting is still happening manually. And as we know, it's just for that sake, it's prone to human error. And I don't want to go into the details of the different news pieces that I'm chose to illustrate this concept, but let's just say that, yeah, there is indeed an argument to be made about, how to make the elections the most accurate that they can be. And I have to say that in order for us to be able to achieve that, that's when electronic voting kicks in, because it's the one that yields the highest levels of accuracy, be in the form of touchscreen voting or with a paper trail, ballot scanners or ballot marking devices, or even online voting. These types of technology allows us to eliminate human error. It guarantees consistency. I read the other day that there was an election in a country in Western Europe in which sometimes where they counted the votes by hand, if they counted it 4 times, they had 4 different results, just because of human error. And again, you get consistency when you use technology to assist in that process. It does mitigate coercion to an extent, because part of the the load that falls on the backs of poll workers, it's shifted sometimes towards the system and it releases them a bit of that, I would say, psychological load that makes them prompt to be coerced during election day. It ensures the integrity of the data, it ensures compliance with the law, and overall, I think it increases the efficiency and agility of the election day. The second theme is increased transparency. So when I say increased transparency, I see this happening along different areas. The first one is actually not technology related. It has to do with transparency in procurement and deployment process. I see that as we move forward, there's going to be an increased awareness of potential conflict of interest. And there are some news pieces already and some initiatives in the European Union and in the UK, not related specifically to the elections industry, but more widely to hiring firms that might have conflict of interest. So this is going to become, I would say, a criteria by which the procurement process is going to be conducted in the future. There is also some additional transparency measures when it comes to deployment or development and deployment of any new technology, which is the fact that you don't necessarily need to trust the vendor on what the product does, but you can rely on third-party independent auditors or certification agencies or entities to review the system and that it does what it needs to do accurately and securely. And we also see, again, a relevant trend towards source close disclosure. This is not necessarily to do that systems are going to become open source, but that the visibility of the inner workings of these systems is going to be increased towards EMBs and interested parties, that are really striving for greater transparency. Moving on to more technology-related transparency measures, one trend that is going to certainly, I'm almost sure that is going to become commonplace in the next few years, has to do with end-to-end verifiability. End-to-end verifiability is a set of cryptographic protocols that ensure that ballots are cast as intended, recorded as cast, and tally as recorded. So this triad of guarantees is the one that ensure that the results reflect the will of the voters. These protocols were actually originally envisioned for systems that were paperless, but right now there have also some applicability on paper-based elections. So end-to-end verifiability is something that we will be for sure starting to see more widely as a requirement and as an expectation, rather than as a differentiator in the future. Is something that is going to be sort of the new standard for all voting technology globally. And we're already seeing that, I have to say, in the recommendations that are being made by the European Union and the US Election Assistance Commission, where they explicitly name end-to-end verifiability as a requirement for the voting systems in the years to come. And last, we will also have, of course, an increase on cybersecurity awareness. Nimit mentioned this, the threat landscape will keep evolving, and so will, the safeguards need to keep evolving. There are some, I would say, good news along this front, to the extent that transparency, end-to-end verifiability or paper ballots, depending on the type of voting that you use, does provide an ultimate safeguard. And the audits of the paper ballots and the end-to-end verifiability indeed are ways to attest or to ensure the legitimacy of the results. So that is already there and present in many systems. So it's something that the industry the elections industry has going on for itself. There is some other piece of potential, I would say, good news, to the extent that the elections by nature, those are not necessarily, at least though the voting systems are not necessarily systems that are deployed throughout a year. I mean, they have specific timeframes, and they are and their processes are time boxed. So that on its own creates a somewhat smaller attack surface. So those things certainly allows us to think about the election industry security requirements in a different way. On other areas, this is a mission critical activity and such, and there are going to be threats to that system. But again, there are things that allow us to think about elections in somewhat a different way than we think in other systems. We see, or I do see, an increased engagement with researchers and academics. This will also create a demand for us to see and assess risk in a different way, because as we engage with these academics, we want to ensure that transparency is increasing, and we have to be able to interpret their findings in a way that is constructive and not weaponize researchers' findings as it tends to happen in some situations, and as we see somehow in the US since the last presidential election. And we will also anticipate that new standards and guidelines that are specific to the industry will become available in this specific area. And last but not least, the last theme is increased accessibility. When I say increased accessibility, I mean essentially three things: give more options to voters to cast their ballots, increase accessibility, and increase usability. Two success stories that I think illustrate this theme very well are already happening, and it's the impact of online voting in Estonia and Los Angeles County and the way that they reimagine the voter experience. So let me briefly touch upon those two success stories. Online voting in Estonia has been available for all voters since 2005. I claim this to be sort of the gold standard for online voting because of the time that it has. It's the more mature implementation that there is. And I would say that Estonia is kind of the cradle of applied research in online voting, because they, a lot of sort of the cryptographic constructs that deal with end-to-end verifiability came from Estonia and have been actually applied in the system in Estonia. All voters, both domestic and overseas, are allowed to choose among different ways in which they can cast ballots. So it's a truly multi-channel voting experience comprising online voting as well as early and election day paper-based voting. The last election saw a continuous trend of ever increased participation. Peter mentioned this. Yes, in the last local elections in October, 47% of all the votes cast were cast online. So again, this is increasing steadily since the inception of online voting in Estonia. And we see also, very encouraging signs of wide adoption. There is really not a way to frame this as a system that is going to be used for a specific sector of the population. We see that, across age groups, the use of online voting is almost uniformly spread, and it's very encouraging to see that this data is actually from the 2019 elections. Approximately 35% of online votes were cast by individuals who were 55 years and older. So again, the technology gap doesn't seem to be creating a lot of obstacles for adoption of these type of technology. And closing with LA County. LA County has redesigned their voting system from scratch. They did the system on their own, and for many years they were devising all of these ideas in how to reinvent the voting experience so that it would be better for voters in general. And the result of that became a realization in the 2020 elections, and the results were successful. I mean, in LA, voters are allowed to vote anywhere. They don't need to vote on a specific polling place. They are allowed to vote in any of the voting centers that are made available for voters. And those voting centers are actually open not only on election day, but up to 10 days before election day. So they have also that ability to cast their ballots earlier. For voters that are not on the voting or the voters list, there is this possibility of doing same-day registration when the voter arrives, and they can, providing some information, apply for a registration and cast the ballot. And then once that registration has been validated, the ballot it's counted in the official results. The system is also highly accessible. It provides voting experience in more than 13 languages. LA County it's a very global community, people from all over the world, and there is a wide access to different languages there and requirements to use different languages. And in this case, the voting system allows them to independently vote in whatever language they are more comfortable with. In a typically paper-based scenario, this would be prohibitively expensive because you would have to print, all the different ballot configurations in a number of different languages. So the waste that you might generate there would be huge. But in this case, that's not what's happening because the system actually is the one that prints the ballot. So the LA County uses a voting machine, which is also called a ballot marking device, that is the one that generates the final ballot that is going to be tabulated with the selections that the voter made, and it's going to display the voting experience in the language that the voter is familiar with. And I would say that one of the last few innovations that have been successfully tested and proven in LA is the poll pass technology, whereby voters are allowed and even encouraged to log into a website where they can see the ballots that they are eligible to vote on and the contests which they are eligible to vote on. And through that, they're going to be able to pre-select the candidates from that selection. That generates a QR code that they bring to the vote center, and they can use to be read by the voting machine so that those selections are displayed automatically. and they just can confirm or change those elections and then, make their voting experience a lot faster than it used to be. And, I just wanted to close by saying that these two, I think, are the harbingers of what's to come. I mean, LA and Estonia can teach us something about these new and interesting developments in making technology more accessible to voters and bringing the elections ever more closer to the voting population. And with that, I close and thank you. I'm open for any questions. Thanks.